get to the first of our speakers then, our State Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian. I don't think needs to be introduced to most of you, who's going to talk to us a bit about what is going on up at the State House. So, welcome, Kate.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all on the screen and in person. Nice to be with you. Happy New Year. Hope you and your families are doing well. I certainly want to give lots of time for you all to weigh in on some things and ask questions or give me some suggestions for the coming year plus. But I'll.
Would you mind just letting that person who wants to be admitted? Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Just keep me posted if I miss something. So I'll start out by just giving a quick recap of the last legislative session. So we just started a new legislative session that will go for the 2 years. We were sworn in just the very beginning of this month. So recapping last year, let's say, since I was last here to give some updates about what the state was working on, and I think we did a really great job on some pretty important legislation. So we had some very regressive, terrible Supreme Court decisions that came down toward the end of this court session, and the legislature acted very swiftly to respond to those. So we passed a reproductive health access and protection law that was bipartisan, which is lovely to see. Once again, Massachusetts is showing the rest of the country how it could be done. The governor signed it into law. I was really proud to get to stand up on the House floor and speak about my own experiences needing medical care for miscarriages that might now be looked at suspiciously in other states, and how horrifying that must be for women around the country. So the new law that we have codifies, again, the right to reproductive health care access and abortion, and it also protects our medical professionals and people who travel here from other states to seek that care. We also updated some of our gun safety legislation. So the Supreme Court again sent us a regressive law about really limiting how states can legislate in this space. We cleaned up our statutes to make sure they are in compliance. But there's a real commitment in the legislature to doing more comprehensive gun safety legislation this session. I know that's a huge priority for Speaker Mariano. He shared that with us in the caucus meeting that we had when we were getting ready to vote on this more discrete package that we finished up last year. We also passed the Work and Family Mobility Act to allow our undocumented neighbors to apply for a standard driver's license. And the voters at the polls in November reaffirmed that choice by rejecting a proposal to overturn that law. We banned child marriage. Sort of surprising that still existed in 2021, but it no longer does in our state. We expanded free school meals for this current school year. So the federal government stepped forward during COVID and made school meals universal, but that expired at the end of the previous school year that just ended, I suppose, last summer. So the legislature saw fit in our budget for this current current fiscal year, which corresponds with the 2022 to 23 school year, to make universal school meals continue to be available. There'll be legislation, there is legislation filed right now for this session to make that permanent. So looking forward to seeing that hopefully moved. And one of the big omnibus bills that we got through at the end of the session was around behavioral health, continuing to look for opportunities to support people, looking into resources. There's a good bit of provisions in there that I really appreciated about meeting kids in school where they are. Happy to, provide anybody with more information about that. Our fiscal year 23 budget included historic investments in early education and childcare, which is near and dear to my heart professionally and personally. I was glad to be the spokesperson for the Progressive Caucus, House Progressive Caucus, when we went and advocated to House Ways and Means about our priorities, and we put historic, unprecedented funding into early education and care. So that's going on right now for this fiscal year, but there are really important bills that have been filed to sort of make significant reforms and to continue to build on the work that we put together through a special commission that the legislature was chaired by Senator Lewis, our senator, and Representative Pike, to really look at the ecosystem of early childhood education and think about real reforms that need to occur. And then I guess, for local earmarks in the budget, Senator Lewis and I were able to get money for the Melrose Middle School elevators, money for fire breathing apparatus for the firefighters, and playground recreation equipment for more accessible parks. And the economic development law that got completed just toward the end of the fall, there were earmarks for the fire department headquarters, another for Memorial Hall, and then some for placemaking for commerce and civic engagement. Two more. We did two important climate bills, laws, a 2050 roadmap that we passed. I talked about that one with you all because that happened sort of at the beginning of the session. Toward the end of the session, we did one on more clean energy, continuing to modernize our grid, and then a lot on offshore wind. So that happened all by the end of calendar year 2022. We all got sworn in, I think it was January 5th or 6th of this month. It already feels like a year ago. And so just last Friday was the deadline by which legislators needed to file bills to have them guaranteed to be assigned a bill number and go to a committee for a hearing and have committees take action on them. So that was a scramble, but a lot of fun. And legislators can do as many or as few as they'd like. I think my office, which is one legislative aide, Julia, and me, put together about 40 bills that I'm really excited about. And overall, I believe I've seen numbers between over 6,000, someone said over 7,000 bills that were filed, so there are a lot. I'm happy to talk about any and all of them. You can go on my website, on the state legislature website and see everything that was filed. A couple to highlight. There's one around community justice that I filed with Leader Frank Moran, who represents parts of Lawrence. And this bill is really about the ways in which we ensure that judges are clear on being able to support people who are in pretrial detention or are all the way through to probation with accessing what is the Office of Community Justice Programs that have treatment and coaching and a lot of sort of support systems in place. So that's a refile, and it moved a little bit last year, but I'm hoping it'll move further along this session. Today, if you saw on social media, I put up a post about two bills that I'm really excited about around digital data privacy. I know you all maybe remember me waxing poetic about my Student and Educator Data Privacy Act last session. Massachusetts is one of only 5 states in the nation that hasn't updated our education laws around digital data, and no one can dispute that we have a ton of it now, after COVID particularly. So it would codify some requirements in our statutes around how ed tech providers are using our student data, requiring them not to advertise to our students, commercialize them, create a profile that lasts past the use of the software. So that was refiled. And then additionally, working with ACLU Massachusetts, I filed a cell phone location bill. So this would prohibit tech providers from taking our location data and selling it or commercializing it, which is now critically important out of the Dobbs decision, again, the abortion case, because if women or others are traveling to Massachusetts to seek care and their location is being shared and then sold, that's a huge problem. So I'll be working with ACLU Massachusetts on that. Some others just to flag, but ask me about them if you're interested. A college and high school bill about making sure we have more pathways for students in every high school in the state to achieve college credit or career credentialing by the time you graduate, sort of to create a greater pathway. A couple of housing bills, one filed with MAPC around making sure that municipalities, which already have to report all this data about their new developments and what's affordable, that our state agency that takes in all that data is actually creating a dashboard that anybody can use to sort of see where development is happening and where people can maybe find affordable housing. Another to increase our rental deductions that people can take for tax purposes if they're renters. There's one on getting lead out of school water, which I filed with MassPIRG, an elder affairs long-term care bill, really focused on our assisted nursing facilities. A number of bills around blockchain technology, a few working with the Melrose Veterans Advisory Board to support our veterans and service members, a Dignity Alliance bill that I filed related to aging in place and sort of supporting community-based programming for our elders, a Seizure Safe Schools bill with the Epilepsy Foundation. So those are bills that I filed. There's more. Happy to hear about any of them or others. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you've got up to 6,000 to 7,000 additional ones. So for every individual legislator, you may start to hear about a bill that you want me to look at and think about, and I'd love to hear from you about what you care about. And at the same time, the whole concept of co-sponsorship is sort of overwhelming for a single representative with her one staff member. So if you see a list of people who have co-sponsored a bill and I'm not on it, that's not necessarily because I don't support it. And little secret, if you see someone else's name on it, it doesn't necessarily mean they support it either. So it's sort of, there's a little bit of every rep or senator takes it a little differently and tries to approach it differently. So last session, I think I poured over every bill that my colleagues would email us about, and I try to look it through and think through all the machinations of how it might play out. That's just, I realized this time around, not going to be feasible and probably not the most productive use of my time. But I do definitely care about what constituents care about. There are obviously really trusted advocacy organizations and think tanks that I think do really great work, and so I'll be looking closely at what their priority legislation is. If I don't co-sponsor something right away, it's not to say that I can't later, or that I can't advocate for it, or that I wouldn't vote in favor of it. And it's possible, I would never co-sponsor something that I don't believe in at all. It's possible I could co-sponsor something but believe that it needs to be modified through the legislative process, which we know will happen potentially for many bills. So all these bills are now with the clerk's office. The next step is that the Speaker and the Senate President will work with all of us to assign committees. So they'll identify chairs and vice chairs, and we'll all as a body vote on those recommendations, and then the committees will be formed. And at that point, then the clerks can look at all these bills and decide where they go. So then the chairs will have to take a look at all those bills with their committees and figure out a cadence to how they're going to divide them up to have hearings. And then every bill will get a hearing with some other bills at the same time. And over time, the committees will move bills out with recommendations that they should pass, and then they'll be assigned to another committee. Or if they're sent to study, it suggests that it wasn't quite ripe to move. So there's a lot that will happen now between today and then our end of formal session in theory will be July 31st of 2024. And that's when we try to wrap up all official business, and any bill that might have any sort of deliberation that's necessary would sort of work its way through the process by then, or early into the hours of August 1st. Or if you're me, and I ended up being a division monitor that night of our last session, I don't know if you all know this, but we went for 22 straight hours. So I was awake and on the House floor from noon on a Sunday until 10 a.m. on the Monday. And I've never pulled an all-nighter in my life, so I wasn't really thrilled about that. Over 40 in my first all-nighter.
They were easier when we were 20.
I bet
And
they were.
there were no drinks.
Not for me anyway. So other than that, I think another way that legislation can move is through caucuses. So like-minded representatives and senators may get together on a particular issue. Some of the caucuses that I'm on the Progressive Caucus, as I mentioned. I'm also a member of the Women's Caucus. There's a Zero Waste Caucus, which I think is actually an area that's sort of ripe for some movement in the House and in the Senate, the legislature. We've done obviously quite a bit on energy, but I think there's a complementary role to be played on sort of supporting sustainability and looking at, single-use plastics and, producer responsibility and that sort of thing. I'm on the Gateway Cities Caucus, since my district includes Malden. The Fells Caucus, which is really, a gym nearby and something that we want to take care of as stewards. The MBTA Caucus, I think we'll continue to see real attention on the MBTA system, including we obviously have the federal oversight sort of are going on, but there needs to be, a real commitment to improving that system. And then I'm co-chair of the Blockchain Technology Caucus in the House. I've also am co-chairing an advisory council that the legislature created some years ago on special education and the Bureau of Special Education Appeals. So it's just an advisory council that we meet quarterly. We'll have our second meeting will be this February, and we meet with the BSEA and DESE to sort of better understand the system through which families and districts need to navigate when they're dealing with disputes over special education services. In the district, I'm still going to be doing my community conversations, which are quarterly virtual meetings on particular topics. Last year, I was a bit of a slacker. We did it only 3 times, but we did one on lifelong learning to kick off in the new year. We did one on consumer action for climate resiliency, which was great. We had panelists from Melrose and Wakefield talking about solar panels, heat pumps, and electric vehicles, and one on data privacy. Love to hear from any of you if you have suggestions for what would be really great topics to bring in experts. I just facilitate a conversation among them on a topic of interest to folks. I've done 36 podcasts to date over at MTV. This Friday, we'll be interviewing MTV itself to hear about the people behind the scenes and what an important role they play in civic engagement in Melrose. I'll be meeting with Melrose Creative Alliance to talk about arts and culture in the city, and staff from Congresswoman Clark's office to share with residents sort of what you would turn to Catherine Clark's office for in terms of constituent services and things going on in Congress. Last year we launched our Recycling and Sustainability Days, one in Melrose, one in Wakefield. We're going to do that again. We've secured April 1st here in Melrose. We'll be over at the high school again. We'll have our local groups setting up tables. There'll be an opportunity to bring by your larger pieces of equipment and furniture that you no longer need to repurpose for habitat or recycling. I'll probably do another fall festivity in October with local officials here. We did that now 2 years in a row with pumpkin painting, yoga, etc. And of course, you can always go to my website, kateforrep.com, where we maintain a series of resources on food stability, housing security, mental well-being, unemployment, and small business support, among others. So we update those periodically just to let people know where they can go to sort of have a one-stop shop of if they have a question or an idea about something they want to be involved in or need help with. So I'm going to pause there and really appreciate the chance to get to hear from you all.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I think you know how to take questions, so I think you can handle it yourself. I do see we have a raised hand.
Yeah, Annie, did you want to kick it off?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
That was like insanely thorough. So good for you. A little much to take in, but this is my first meeting.
Oh,
I'm actually an
welcome.
independent. I'm thinking about rejoining the Democratic Party because, the alternative is tyranny. And I want to be able to participate. And I guess my question really is, I'm a communications person. I spent 16 years down in DC trying to insert my tiny foot into the door at the DNC and having difficulty because it's a fairly, unfortunately, the party of the people can be a little bit exclusionary. And so what I'm trying to find out, and I had this conversation with Seth Moulton at one of his events a couple of years ago, was, is there any way to get support from the party to come up with a citizen-based sort of strategic communication pod, where we can be looking at rhetoric and things like that from a ground-up perspective? The Democrats unfortunately tend to fumble the strategic communication ball a little too often for my taste. That's why I became an independent after John Kerry lost. And it just seems really hard to find out who do you reach about a little more opportunity for average citizens, so to speak, who aren't elected and who aren't connected, to get together and to look at rhetorical challenges the party has had so that we can all fight a better fight, especially with the misinformation brigades.
I appreciate
I just don't always it's like completely unclear to me where to go and who to talk to and whether there's even any interest, whether it's all got to be in the party, within the walls, or whether some imagination can be used to have a little more.
That sounds like a great question, and I'd love to hear Kate's answer on it.
So, well, first of all, I'm excited to hear that you are interested in taking your skills and your expertise on communications and supporting the Democratic Party with them, because my experience with at least our local committee is that we are very eager to have people, step forward and share their skill set and their resources. Is this a yes, Bob Burns?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, then.
Great. I'm monitoring the waiting room as well. So I would really encourage you to talk to Jim and the other, members of the leadership team on the Melrose committee to think about how, we've done strategic communications planning, I know, and there have been subgroups in that space. Obviously, Mass Dems as well has, which is down near the State House. And you can contact them directly, or if you need contact information, you're welcome to be in touch with me as well. My experience in the Democratic Party as an elected official is that it's a pretty big tent, having met, there are 160 of us reps in the House, and we each independently and individually have a different communication style. It doesn't feel particularly top down, and there's room for diversity of thought to some, to a large degree. So, maybe in the same way as I referenced at the beginning of my chat about how we're doing things a little bit differently than in DC, that may be your experience, I hope, here as well. And it's great to have you here for one of your first, if not your first meetings.
Well, thank you. I just want to say hi to everybody, and at some point, if I can get the contact information, I'm perfectly happy to give my email, but literally to have a direct email or phone and a name of a human, that would be great.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Great.
Bye, everybody.
Nice to see you, Annie. Thank you. Yes, Maureen.
Hi Kate, thank you. I agree, that was a lot, but it's great. So a bill that I would like to have you keep an eye on is actually one, I think it was filed by Senator Lewis, to increase the alcohol tax. So right now, we haven't had a tax increase for I don't know how long on alcohol. And the income from alcohol revenues, doesn't support the damage that alcohol causes in our state. So the cost to our state is much greater than the income that the state is getting. So
Thank you for raising that. I just saw today, similarly, and probably you already know this, Massachusetts just got a grade sort of on a national, there was a national state by state around smoking. And we got very high marks for some of our legislation related to, prohibiting flavor. I don't know if everyone could hear that. Maureen was raising up a bill that she believes was filed to increase our alcohol tax and saying that she'd love me to take a look at that. And so that's great to know. And additionally, Massachusetts did not get a great grade though, because our tax is pretty low and our funding for smoking cessation and prevention programs is relatively low compared to other states. So I guess in some ways then it's not surprising perhaps that our alcohol tax has also not kept up with the costs for prevention and education.
I think Massachusetts, I think, has the lowest alcohol tax in New England, other than New Hampshire.
Oh, well, do they even count? Okay,
Thank you, Kate.
thank you.
Other questions?
Any suggestions for podcast guests or community conversation issues? You don't have to give them to me now, but please, everyone should, I think, knows how to find me or contact me. So I would love to hear from you if you have those ideas. Eric.
Hi, just a quick question. It was mentioned actually locally last night relative to the Student Opportunity Act, the funding of the Student Opportunity Act, as well as how, I guess from your perspective, how the state, I know there was a bit of a tussle last year after the automatic refunds went out after that, the 62F, I can't remember exactly what it was.
You got it.
So I guess the macro question is in terms of from your hearing from your colleagues, leadership, and the new administration in terms of the I hate to say the riches that are floating around the state house, because there's never enough resources, but obviously where the city of Melrose parochial is where I'm concerned about in terms of how the landscape is for local aid, Chapter 70, Chapter 90, Student Opportunity Act, special ed circuit breaker, and the like. And this kind of your best finger in the wind gut on how that seems to might proceed over the course of through this year and next year in terms of, I think the estimates for revenue, I think State House News Service said that this year and next year will probably stay about where flat. They're not going to go up again. It's higher than average. There'll probably be a little bit of time before it tips down. But just kind of where you think that how that revenue may hopefully make its way back to city.
Right. So there was it was either yesterday. I think it must have been yesterday. There was a budget hearing, right, with Ways and Means, and they brought forward a bunch of different, or just maybe not budget, but sort of economic prognosis, and talking about the Fair Share Amendment passing and what that will mean for state revenue, for example, and talking about 62F. I think Horowitz over at Tufts was sort of opining that it's unlikely to be triggered again, like it was this past year. So it's a good question. I mean, I feel very confident that the legislature will fully fund the year of the Student Opportunity Act and the commitments that are in there, including, charter school reimbursement, circuit breaker, which are for, extraordinary special education costs and so forth. And I think we're also taking a close look, many of us, at some of the other components of funding that are important for school districts like the MSBA, and the reimbursement rates for a district. So Wakefield is having a new high school, and there's the Northeast Vocational Tech, and all costs are really going up, and municipalities are, responsible for a lot of that. And so I think there's a number of us, including Senator Lewis and I, are eager to sort of take another look at that formula, make sure we're directing enough funding for capital projects, as well as, the annual appropriation for Chapter 90 and the related components of that. So I feel pretty bullish that, Melrose certainly saw a significant increase thanks to the Student Opportunity Act in the current fiscal year, and I have a sense that, that we'll fully fund again this year. I didn't go to the MMA, the Mass Municipal Association has its annual meeting, it just happened, and I heard people buzzing around saying, did the governor say anything about Chapter 90, which is local unrestricted aid? And I guess there was no statement made there. Sometimes governors like to tease that a little bit, so I don't have as much of a sense of that, but I would anticipate with someone like Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, who is a former municipal leader and mayor, that they're mindful of how important dollars coming back to the local communities really are.
Thanks for that, Shay.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you, Kate. Probably the biggest local news story in Melrose over the past few months has been on the issue of the contract for our teachers. And there is a bill I know that would allow teachers and other non-safety public workers to strike.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
My expectation is that will not be successful in the current legislative session. And it would be a first-time file, I think. Certainly the first time the MTA has indicated that that's a priority piece of legislation for it. It wasn't showing up last session, or as far as I'm aware, in previous sessions. So I think that's highly unlikely to become law in the state, certainly in this session.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I did know it was an MTA priority, so I wondered if that might have gotten it more support. But.
It make it possibly, I'm not certain.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Kate? All right, well, it's always a pleasure to have you here, Kate. Thank you so much. Great. Okay, then. So, thank you so much to Kate, and now we can move on to our next speaker, who is Keith Lovett, who is a friend to our organization here. We've heard from Keith before, and it's on the subject of bringing ranked choice voting here to Melrose. So, Keith, come on up.
Hey, everyone. I'll try to bounce back and forth between kind of looking at the Zoom and looking in person. I'm Keith Lovett. I'm in Ward 6, Precinct 1. I'm a 2015 MHS graduate. And this is basically an update to kind of what was previously presented on, not sure exactly what time, but probably, I don't know, around a year ago. Just kind of giving an intro on this initiative that I'm working on to bring ranked choice voting to Melrose municipal elections. So mayor, school committee, city council. And I guess some of you were, or actually probably most of you were at that, but I guess it's there. Would it be useful to, I'll just give like a 15-second elevator pitch on ranked choice voting.
Sure.
Yeah, it'd be very
That'd be a
helpful.
good idea.
Sure. So ranked choice voting is basically just, instead of getting to choose one candidate, you kind of rank your candidates in order of preference. So first choice, second choice, third choice. The analogy that I sometimes use is if you were to go to an ice cream store and try to get ice cream and they didn't have your favorite flavor, you wouldn't just probably then leave the store. You would kind of choose like a second option. So it's kind of a systematic way of mimicking that in the context of elections. So feel free to kind of ask me, time-wise, how much time do I have? Sorry, I should ask you.
Go at your own pace, I'll let you know.
Okay, I won't go too long. So feel free to ask me afterwards, kind of anything more mechanics related, but a lot of this is just to kind of give an update on kind of how it's been going over the past year and what we're kind of looking forward to in the future. So I'm not sure why it says 111 here, but I might have lost some of the formatting, but in any case, the top three kind of reasons for, arguments for kind of why ranked choice voting in Melrose that we're outlining is that it would encourage participation in local elections, both in terms of like candidates running and more engagement from the community in elections in turn, increased representation, and save money and time. So those are kind of that's the why that we're outlining. But now to kind of get into what we've been up to in 2022. So the main thing that we were focused on and are going to continue to focus on is a petition that's from Voter Choice Massachusetts. Some of you might have been familiar with the 2020 statewide campaign. Voter Choice Massachusetts was the organization that ran that campaign, organized that campaign. And so they put out a petition that is essentially a local equivalent, basically saying, I support the use of ranked choice voting in my municipal local elections. And the purpose of that petition, some folks kind of are reluctant to kind of be added to maybe another email list, but that is not what this is about, is really to have a way for local organizers that are working in different municipalities across the state, like I'm one of them who kind of raised my hand for Melrose, is to, for us to keep in touch so that when there's kind of the appropriate critical mass of people and necessary landscape to kind of further push this along locally, that can happen. So that's one of the purposes of the petition. So we had 50 Melrosians, over 50 Melrosians sign onto that. We also had a booth in the 2022 Melrose Victorian Fair and gave presentations to 4 Melrose organizations. We've been meeting with elected officials and kind of grass tops within the community, as well as having meetings with other organizers in other communities that are working in parallel. We also launched like a Q&A video series that's just meant to kind of be a way for Melrosians to ask questions about this and really trying to lean heavily into like some of the resources that already exist from organizations like Fair Vote, Rank the Vote, and some of the data that exists coming out of other ranked choice voting elections that have used ranked choice voting. And then we're also going to start endorsements. So we do have our first endorsement from like a professor here in Melrose, and we're kind of looking to continue that trend. So you can see here we had like a Voter Choice Massachusetts Ranked Choice Voting Supporter Summit back in the summer. So that's a picture of there, and then our Melrose Victorian Fair booth. I mentioned there's some other communities that are working on this in parallel or already have ranked choice voting implemented. So Cambridge has actually had ranked choice voting since 1941. East Hampton recently used it to elect, or in their first like election where it's been used. I believe that was for mayor. There's a home rule legislation passed favorably in Amherst, Arlington, and Northampton, and filed for upcoming legislation or legislative sessions in Concord. there's also kind of local committee work going on, so it's recommended by a local committee in Somerville and understudy by another local committee in Brookline. So all this to say, like, this isn't just me or, running with a wonky idea. This is something that, there's just kind of people who are passionate about this working on throughout the state and also throughout the country. So probably the most prevalent example to come up in 2020 was in the Alaska primary. In 2022 was the Alaska primary. And I really try to lean into these 3 data points that came out of it that I think are really telling. So I think that dispels kind of a myth that exists that ranked choice voting might be confusing to voters when they go to use it. So in looking at the data that came out of that, and kudos to the folks that ran that election, 99.8% of the ballots were valid, 85% of the voters thought it was simple to fill out their RCV ballot, and 95% of the voters received instructions on how to fill out their ballot beforehand. So there is good practice that's being built up over time to implement this and conduct elections. And there was also a number of wins in different states and municipalities across the country. So Nevada just recently passed it. They have to pass it again in 2024. It was part of a citizen initiative it's like a constitutional amendment. So they have to pass it once and then pass it again. Seattle, Washington passed it for primaries. Portland, Oregon moves from, this is kind of getting a little bit in the weeds, but ranked choice voting to proportional ranked choice voting, which is what Cambridge uses as well. Multnomah County, Oregon passed it for county elections. Evanston, Illinois passed it with 82% in favor. So really, I think that speaks to kind of once people are familiar with ranked choice voting, it is something that people seem to like. Fort Collins, Colorado, Ojai, California, and Portland, Maine. And that momentum isn't going away. When we look at 2023, lawmakers in 14 states have already introduced 27 bills proposing ranked choice voting models. And you can kind of see a map of that here. So then coming back to Melrose, what are we kind of working on going forward? So we plan to do more presentations like this, more tabling, hopefully getting more endorsements, more conversations with stakeholders, more gathering signatures, more Q&A videos, and more creativity, fun, and education. Kind of going into that last bit a little bit, this is really just kind of a passion project for me and whoever else wants to be a part of it, because beyond just ranked choice voting, it really is a way for me to kind of just figure out, okay, how does this really work? How do changes take place and kind of adjust within the system? So, through this process, I just think working on this initiative or any initiative, especially at the local level, is just a good way to learn about local organizations and key city leaders, local governance structures, reading through the charter and things like that. The grassroots infrastructure that would be required for an organization or effort to scale and be created, producing content, what organizing looks like, Melrose history. So this spreadsheet, I'm starting to look through a lot of the city reports and kind of do some data digging and finding as far back as I can in terms of the election data, and trying to launch a grassroots campaign. So the nice thing about that is all of that experience can then be brought over to any and all other causes that you may care about. this was a quote from Jason Lewis, who's definitely, I would say, one of the more vocal proponents of ranked choice voting in the state, who said, we need to do everything we can to expand voting enfranchisement and expand access to voting rights in democracy. Ranked choice voting is an important strategy to move us in that direction. In closing, so what can folks do if they're interested? Well, you can sign the petition. I'll hand out kind of a little leaflet that has the link to that, as well as if you want to just write it on a piece of paper, that's fine too. You can also like ask a question as part of like the Q&A video series. You can share this with kind of your network, and we're doing presentations, either like updates or whatever kind of folks within a certain group might be interested in. Like if they're new to ranked choice voting, happy to kind of give that talk as well. So if you want to kind of request a speaker to show up to an event, happy to do that as well. So thank you for listening. That's it.
So we'll take questions. I'll actually start with one, Keith, which is the question of, okay, if we wanted to have ranked choice voting here in Melrose locally, what is the process for that? Because in Evanston you said it's 82%, but by the sound of it, would this be something that the council would endorse and then there would be a home rule petition through them? How would this work?
Yeah, my understanding is that, well, there's definitely like a couple different avenues, I think. My understanding is that a home rule petition would be created and like the city council would vote on that, along, I think, with the mayor. So that would be like one avenue. You could also like put it as a ballot question. And yeah, so the home rule petition, just to kind of expand on that, is would be sent to the state legislature to then kind of approve of it. So my hunch and kind of what the people who are working on this alongside of me think is that, you know, the more cities and towns that are kind of added to that queue, you know, the more pressure the state feels to kind of act on it. Becca Rauch actually is refiling a bill that creates kind of a standardized template for if a city or town were to choose to adopt ranked choice voting, that would allow them to not have to file that home rule petition. So kind of streamline the process, which I think would be a great thing, because it just seems to be the trend that more and more cities and towns are getting on board with this. So, yeah.
So your strategy right now, though, you want folks to sign that petition, certainly, which I've done, and if you haven't, you know, go for it. And then that petition would then be submitted to the councilors at some point, or?
Yeah, so we can, like, it's not like formal in the same sense of like the yellow sheets of paper that, you know, are used for like adding as a candidate to a ballot, right? Like gathering signatures, and that it's through every action, if folks are familiar with that. It's information that could be shared with the city council, but we're also using it just as a means to let folks know how and when they can take action. Yeah. But I guess just to last point on that, this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And so the petition is a tool to kind of help create the landscape that's necessary to take action on it.
So this is a long game.
Yeah.
How many people do you need on the petition before you bring it to the council?
There was somewhere around 8,000 folks in Melrose that voted in favor of ranked choice voting in the statewide election. The higher the better, really. Yeah, we kind of have a progress bar on our website where we're kind of tracking over time that number on a weekly basis. And basically be kind of a fun way to gamify it, and we have like some competition going on between the different cities and towns that are working on this, who also have the number of signers in their communities.
More questions, and we can't see the other folks. There may be questions in the.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I can stop
Chat.
sharing.
We can see. Okay. Any,
Oh, I have a question.
Maureen?
We happen to have Rep. Kate here, so would you want to share with us your feelings about ranked choice voting?
I'm certainly open to it. I think in the 32nd Middlesex, Wakefield voted against it when it was on the statewide ballot, and Melrose was very closely split. Maybe slightly more people voted in favor as against. You know, I think it's great to learn more and be open to it, and I think it's a really smart strategy to start local and try to build models around the state where you see it implemented and it's working, and then you can create this template. The home rule petition process is very, it slows things down. I have a bill filed, for example, Melrose and now Wakefield first and Melrose created that property tax exemption program for lower income seniors, where we just redistribute the property tax burden. And it has to go through a home rule petition. And so there I am like pushing it through, and we get it through, but it takes like a year plus. And that's a year that people in our town or our city or Wakefield town could have been enjoying a little bit of a relief. So I filed a bill this year that would say, stop making that a home rule petition requirement. Let cities and towns make that call on their own, in the same way that I would be supportive of cities and towns consider, making ranked choice voting, a decision that's at the local level for local elections. It makes a lot of sense. Those are some quick thoughts. I mean, one thing that I didn't bring up tonight, because I think I already talked about it the last time I was with this group, was the Votes Act that we passed in the last session, which was critical for expanding access to the ballot and making it easier for people to vote with no reason, vote by mail, longer early in-person voting days. All of that is huge. And, one thing that we're hearing is there's a lot of pain for the clerks and the elections administrators for what it costs and the processing of things and all of that. And so they've, asking us to really look at that, like how much more arduous is that process for them, and what are the resources that have been provided to support that effort. So that's probably another thing that you probably have talking points about and have explored as well, in terms of confirming if there are more costs for training. Well, there would certainly be some level of training that would have to occur, but are there administrative burdens that are greater with ranked choice voting? Then you'd want to know about that to sort of figure out then how do you appropriately provide resources to implement.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And that is part of kind of what makes me confident that this is a long-term thing, because that's kind of the responsibility, or the responsible way of doing it, where, part of this, I think part of that bill that's filed by, actually, I'm not 100% sure, so I won't say it, but, part of doing this is like a public education campaign, right? So just making folks know how this works. And part of that also is like making sure that the city clerk has the necessary resources to put it in place. One thing that's kind of interesting is like, I think seeing Melrose consolidate down to one polling location might kind of lend itself, not being necessary to like ranked choice voting implementation, but having that one polling location, I think, might take one of the kind of administrative questions out of the mix. So it wouldn't be necessary, I don't think, but might simplify it from an administrative standpoint.
Do you see, it looks like there was something in the chat, and then you might have a question there.
Oh,
No,
just,
just nice.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Any other questions for Keith?
I have a question. So, other than that we don't like change, what is the major reason that people are against ranked choice voting?
Yeah, I guess, so I guess I would put, like, my immediate thought is like this, it's too confusing, but I guess I would put that in the same category as like not liking change. So I guess I'll say, you know, another thing I occasionally hear is like, might this lead to, you know, XYZ, you know, more like a certain type of party, or, you know, less of a certain type of party? Like, how would that change, you know, how the party that I care about gets elected or doesn't get elected? So that's something I hear occasionally, and usually, you know, my thought on that is, you know, ranked choice voting is kind of better at, it's more representative of the will of the people, and I think that's kind of what we should aspire to, even if that means, you know, a member of a certain group, you know, gets elected. I mean, I think some of it is also kind of fear-based, rather than kind of grounded in the actual reality. Like, I think during the Cold War, like or prior to the Cold War, and kind of the surrounding Red Scare around that, there was a number of cities that used ranked choice voting and kind of got rid of it out of fear that it would lead to communists getting elected. So there is kind of this knee-jerk response.
Thank you.
Cambridge was the one that kept it. Cambridge was an example of a city that kept it through that scare.
They're just full of commies. All right, so, any other questions? All right, well, thank you again, Keith.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Scam artists are pretending to be IRS officials to get your money. They'll call, email, or text you, claiming you owe back taxes or there's a problem with your tax return. They even rig caller ID to make their call look official. They play on your fears. They threaten to take your driver's license or sue, arrest, or deport you. They want you to pay fast. What's the truth? The truth is the IRS's first contact with you will always be a letter in the mail. It's not a phone call, email, or text message. They won't insist that you pay with a prepaid debit card, a wire transfer, or cashier's check. Now you know. Has an IRS imposter contacted you? Report it at ftc.gov/imposters.
Shopping for a car? Applying for a job? Looking for a home? Or just getting your financial house in order? Then it's time to check your credit report. Good news, it's free. The law entitles you to one free copy of your credit report from each of the 3 nationwide credit reporting companies every 12 months. Why is it important to check your credit report? It has important information about your financial accounts, how you pay your bills, and if you file for bankruptcy. You want to make sure everything is accurate, especially before you buy a house or a car or apply for a job. If you notice something wrong, contact the credit reporting company and business providing the information to correct the error. And checking your report can help you guard against identity theft. Visit ftc.gov/ID theft if you spot accounts that aren't yours. How do you order your free credit report? Order online from annualcreditreport.com, the only authorized website for free credit reports, or call 1-877-322-8228. You'll need to provide your name, address, social security number, and date of birth to verify your identity. Keep in mind, you're entitled to one free copy of your credit report every 12 months from each of the 3 nationwide credit reporting companies. So the next time someone asks, "How's your credit?" you'll have the answer. To order your free credit report, visit annualcreditreport.com or call 1-877-322-8228.
Many hotels, coffee shops, airports, and other places offer free Wi-Fi hotspots. They're convenient. Unfortunately, they often aren't secure. That could make it easy for someone else to access your online accounts or steal your personal information. So, what can you do to reduce your risk? Encryption is the key to keeping your information secure online. When information is encrypted, it's scrambled into a code so others can't get it. How can you be sure your information is encrypted? 2 ways. 1. Use a secure network to access the internet. Don't assume that a public Wi-Fi network uses encryption. In fact, most don't. You can only be sure that a network uses effective encryption if it asks you to provide a WPA or WPA2 password. If you aren't sure, it's best to assume the network is not secure. The second way to protect your information is to send it through a secure website. A secure site will encrypt your information, even if the network doesn't. If the web address starts with HTTPS, then your information is encrypted before it's sent. The S stands for secure. Look for HTTPS on every page you visit, not just when you log in. If you use an unsecured Wi-Fi network to log into an unencrypted website, strangers using that network can hijack your account and steal your private documents, contacts, family photos, even your username and password. If that happens, an imposter could use your email or social networking account to pretend to be you and scam people you care about. Or a hacker could use your password from one website to try to log into a different account and access your personal or financial information. Here are some steps you can take to protect yourself when you use a public Wi-Fi hotspot. Only log in or enter personal information on secure sites that use encryption. Again, look for a web address that begins with HTTPS. Don't use the same username and password for different sites. It could give someone who gains access to one of your accounts access to many of your accounts. Never email financial information, including credit card, social security, and checking account numbers, even if the network and website are secure. Don't stay permanently signed in to accounts. When you've finished using a site, log out. The bottom line, secure Wi-Fi hotspots require a password. Secure websites start with HTTPS. Remember, it's easy to find trusted information about computer security. Just visit onguardonline.gov, the federal government site to help you be safe, secure, and responsible online.